So remember, if at all you need a file upload, it has to be form. Okay, and from the form, if you are supposed to upload a file, your encryption or encoding type should be multi-part form data. And if once you have that, and you can upload the files. Once you have uploaded the files in the backend, how do you accept them? Through request.files, through request.files. And once the submission is done, right? So with whatever the name that the front end is sending, we have to use the same name to retrieve that specific file. And here I'm just saving them. And how do I save it? The file object will have a save method, and where I have to specify the path of where to. I'm using simple path.join here, so that uploads and file name. I'm finding the uploads folder and setting a file name to it, right? And I'm saving them, right? So the file object itself has a save method, and I'm saving them. So that is how we can save the file. Right? Tell me, what is authentication in general? So authentication is a process of validating if a user is valid or not. For example, if you want to log into a particular web server, what would you do? You would provide your username and password. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So you would enter username and password. Now, what should the backend do? It has to validate. Okay. Do I have this email ID with me? Is for that email ID, is this the correct password? Is the password entered valid or not? We have to check that, no? Right? That process of validating the authenticity, user authenticity is basically called as authentication. Basically called as authentication. So for authentication, we'll be using a library called Flask login. So there is a built-in package called Flask login. So not built-in package. So there is a package called Flask login. We'll be using that to manage our login process. So tell me, so when you generally log in, so you want to access a Facebook, for example. Tell me what is the workflow?
Like we had to go for Facebook username URL, and we
Mhm.
had to give the username and password over it, and we'll go enter our.
Okay. What happens after? Why would it ask username and password the first time? And what happens after you enter a username and password?
It is to check whether the user is correct or not, valid or not, valid user or not.
Okay.
It will authenticate, and if it a valid user means it will allow. If valid is not there means it will throw an error. Username or password is incorrect.
Okay. If it is correct,
If it is correct, it will go into that page, login page, like inside Facebook.
right? Then inside, as in, so initially it was protected. Your data was protected with a particular login page. Once you provided a proper valid information, okay, your browser knew that, okay, thereafter it does it ask for a login every time you reload or go to a new page, or will it ask only once? Okay, so generally, so let us talk about simple Facebook application, right? So how do you open a browser, right? You open up your browser, then in the address bar you type, right? You type facebook.com. For example, let me do the same thing as Right, let me just type .com. So what is it doing first? Is it like, directly started showing your data, or is it asking for like, first tell me who you are, right? It has to know who I am so that it can show me my respective data. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right. It would not straight away like, the moment I open browser and say facebook.com, it doesn't directly start showing the data, right? First, it has to know who you are. Then based on your email address and the password validity, right? It would, and once you click on login, then it would validate your data. So what happens is that now let us say, now what did we do? So we have facebook.com and let us say it is asking for two fields, right? And then you have your submit. Then you have your submit button. So either it is email or phone number, I guess. Is that what it is? Email or phone number, then you have password, then you have login. So for what does it say first? Okay, for in order to where does it validate? So I enter my username, I entered my password and then click on submit. Now then this gets submitted to your application. This data, whatever I enter here and submit, it will come to your application where you are running your app.py, right? So you would have written such particular route to handle this data. You take that data and you will have a database. You will have a database, right? Where specifically you will have a table called user. Let us say in the DB, you will have a table called user where, right? Let us say these are the columns, right? Email, right? And then password, phone number, and so on, many other columns. Now let us say email ID for Shrikant is like, let us say Shrikant at gmail.com and password is test at 123. This is my password. Now tell me what happens here. Well, here the input value is. So from here, what I'll do, I will talk to the database. First, I'll check, okay, is this email valid? Do we even have this email ID? Right? Shrikant at my DB also has this data, right? This is the password. This is the email and this is the password that I'm submitting. Now what I'll do once I receive it, I will connect to the database. From the user table, I'll try to see, do you have something called email? Yes, right? Do we have that data? It will return this particular result set. OK, fine, which means the user is valid. Then I have given the password. Now what I have to do is, should I just check, OK, do I have a password called test@123?
Yes, sir.
Now let us say another user, Moment at gmail.com, and his password is test at 124. This my password, let us say 123, Moment password is 124. Slight different. Now instead of 123, I'm going to send it the password as 124. Right. So is that a valid or invalid?
Invalid, sir.
Invalid, because for this email ID, this is not the right password. The right password for this email ID is test at 123. Right. So while searching for the user, I can search, do I have any user with this email ID? Yes, it will return. And for password, I should not be checking like, do I have any password as test at 123? That would be test at 124. Then it will say true. This case, right? But this password doesn't belong to the Srikanth, right? This password belongs to Momin. So when checking for the password, I have to say for this email ID, and I have to pass, is this the right password? If it is true, then it will authenticate. Otherwise, it will say, okay, invalid. Now it will say invalid username or password, right? Now, instead of this, if I send test at 123, then for this email ID is valid, and for that email ID, this password is valid. And hence these two are valid, right? So which means authentication is successful. Authentication is successful. Now from this, once after you enter, right, it validates and it returns a particular response. This is the request, and this hence you will get a response either valid or invalid. This is valid, and this also tells a browser that okay, he is a valid user, right? Next time when you send for that user, right, send certain token. Okay, now if I have to explain about this token, okay, now let us say one thing. So you are, let us say, going to a particular college. You are going to particular college. Okay. For the first time, if when you join the college, what would you do? You would go do the registration. Yes or no? First, you will register yourself with the college,
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
right? And they would give you a particular, once after you register, they will give you one particular thing called ID card. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And every day that you want to go at the gate, what would they check? They will ask you to show me the ID. They'll ask you to show me your ID. And your ID is basically the authentication. The moment you show your ID, if it is valid ID, he would say, get into the college. If it is an invalid, he will say not allowed. Yes or no? That is the job of the security.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, every time you go out of the college in a day, you can go out like any number of times and you can come back any number of times, right? And every time you come back, you should show that you will show this ID and then, okay, this is a valid, then he will enter. Now, does it say like, every time come register? No, right? The moment you have registered, they have given one particular ID card, and using that ID card, right? And that ID card would basically have certain validity as well. So if you have taken a 1 year degree course or like, let us say 2 year course, now that ID card would be valid for 2 years. And after 2 years, if your security notices, okay, this is expired, he will say not allowed. Typically, this is how it works, right? For 2 years time, they have given one token for you, which is your ID card. Every time you want to go in, you don't have to register now. You just show your ID card, you are valid, you are good to go. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
In the same way, your backend also should tell to the browser that yes, I have authenticated this user. And from next time onwards, whenever you're sending this particular data request, send this token back to me. Send this token back to me. That way I will check if this guy is valid or not. If it is valid, then I will um, give the response. If the user is not valid, then I will not give the response. Right. So that means like, once you log in, you go to, so in the Facebook, you have a lot of pages, right? You have like your profile page, right? You have your friends page, you have your posts, right? Where you can just list a list of posts. You can just scroll down and see. You can click on post. Yes or no? There are
Yes, sir.
different pages. There are different pages. And does it ask password every time you go to a profile, you go to a friend's page, you go to a post? Does it ask a password on every path that you take?
No, sir.
Right? It will not. Why? because it knows that he is the same user. He is the same user. But how does the Facebook application know that he is the same user? Because the moment right after you entered your username and password for a validity, say 1 day, 2 days, so it has its own validity. So it would send that token back to the browser, say, okay, keep this token with you for this is for this so and so user. And whenever this user accesses the facebook.com, send this token to me. Okay, that way it will just validate the token in the backend and it will let the user access the data. Right, so it will not ask for a username and password every time you send a go from page to page. Did we understand this concept?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Right,
sir.
this token we basically call it as session ID. Session ID. Okay, this token. And as far as the session is valid, user can access any kind of data. Once the session is expired or invalid, user will not be allowed to access any data. User will not be allowed to access any data. Are we clear?
Clear,
Clear,
sir.
sir.
Clear, sir.
Right, the place where it will check the email id, it will check the email id and the password validity, and that process is called authentication process. And authentication process can result in two ways. One, it is a valid authentication or the invalid, valid data or invalid data. If it is a valid data, we will say authentication is successful. If it is invalid data, authentication is failure. Authentication is failed. Are we clear?
Clear,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes.
Okay.